Bava Batra Daf Yomi Bava Batra. We're going to learn, which is about financial independence, yשכיר עצמו לעבודה זרה. It's Erev Yom Kippur today, and this Yom Kippur, based on what we talked about in Shul on first and second day Rosh Hashanah, and on Monday night here at the Shir, it's a very momentous Yom Kippur. Probably the most important Yom Kippur we've had in modern times, and certainly in our times. And part of it is a Yom Kippur during which we realize the full extent of Am Levadad Yishkon, the full extent of our aloneness. Never has that been made, never in modern times. Talking about certainly post-World War II, and in some ways maybe even World War II, have we felt so alone as we are at the moment. And one has to be aware, we talk about the existential threat to Eretz Israel, and of course we're aware of that every minute, but part of the existential threat is what's happening outside of Eretz Israel, which is an even more disturbing. In Eretz Israel, the Rebbeinu Shalom will help and will sort things out, but the aloneness, the insulation that we see around the world is something much more troubling. And so this is a Yom Kippur where we sit alone with the Rebbeinu Shalom. Rosh Hashanah, we're involved with the Umas HaOlam. At the time, as we learnt in Shul, we learnt the Netziv about at the time that Kamim Sarim Shel Umas HaOlam al Yisrael, at the time when the officers, the Malachim, the angels of Umas Yisrael, of Umas HaOlam, the nations of the world, do battle with Israel on Rosh Hashanah, and we have to deal with that battle. We're involved with the whole world. Rosh Hashanah is global. Rosh Hashanah is universal. Yom Kippur is intimate. Yom Kippur is just us with the Rebbeinu Shalom. We seal ourselves off from the rest of the world, and we focus on the Rebbeinu Shalom. And this is no more relevant. This has never been more relevant than it is this year. So it so happens that in Chulin Daf Yud, I was learning this morning a story that happened on Erev Yom Kippur. What's the story? There's a machlokes in the Gemara in Psak and in Minhagim as to whether we eat the adder of an animal, or the kechal. The Gemara says in Surah they used to not eat the kechal because there are issues with there's milk inside the adder, and how do you get rid of the milk and so on. And in Pumbedisa, the two centers of learning in Bavel had different minhagim. In Pumbedisa they used to eat a kechal. The story is about Rabbi Bar Tamri, who was also known as Rami Bar Dikli from Pumbedita, who came to visit Surah on Erev Yom Kippur. So on today, Rami Bar Dikli arrives in Surah. And he notices that everybody is preparing a meal for Erev Yom Kippur, and they're cutting off the udders of the cows that they're shechting, and they're casting them out, they're throwing the udders out. Azal ihu naktinu achlinu. He went and gathered the udders, and he ate them. They brought him before Rav Chisda, because here he is in Pumbedisa eating udder. Omalei amai tavid achir. Rav Chisda says, what are you doing? He says, Me'atra Rav Yehuda ana da'achil. I'm a Talmud of Rav Yehuda, and in our city we do this. Don't you hold by the din that when you're traveling, you go by the chumras of your place and the chumras of the new place, where they're different minhagim? You take on the harder view, the more stringent view of where you come from, and the more stringent view of where you've come to. And so here you shouldn't be eating chal. He said, I would never eat it in town. I went out of town. I did a barbecue out of town, and that's where I ate it. He said, you did a barbecue out of town? Where did you find barbecues? Where did you do this? How did you even find wood? There's no wood in this area. He says, I gathered together the seeds of grapes that were used for wine making, and I made the fire out of the seeds of grapes. He says, was there a hechsher? Did you find grape seeds with a hechsher? Was it badatz? Where did you find that? It could be yain nesach, it could be treif wine. I could see that these were very old seeds, and they're more than 12 months old, and after 12 months we assume there's no moisture left in them, and even if they were made from non-kosher wine, they're no longer non-kosher. He says, maybe they belong to somebody else and you've stolen them. He said, clearly, if they did belong to anybody, they'd given up hope because they were lying among the weeds and they'd been abandoned for a long time. They really want to get him. Rav Chisda really wants to get this guy. He says, did you put on tefillin this morning? If I can't get you on what you ate, if I can't get you in your kashrus, what about tefillin? He says, actually, I didn't put on tefillin this day. He says, why didn't you put on tefillin? He says, I suffer from a disease of the intestines, and I can't go more than a few minutes without going to the restroom, and you don't have to put on tefillin if that's the case. He thought, now I've got him. I understand he didn't put on tefillin, but he's wearing a four-cornered cloak and it doesn't have tzitzis. Why would you put on tzitzis? Amalei says, Talishula. He says, it's not mine. I borrowed the cloak. It's not my clothes. And Rav Yehuda says a Talishula doesn't need tzitzis for the first 30 days. And I go by Rav Yehuda. So the story goes. When Reb Chaim Shmulevitz used to quote this Gemara, he always used to ask a question that I have about the Rambam. That's why I remember this so clearly. My question with the Rambam was, we know the Rambam worked as a doctor very, very hard. He worked very hard in the royal court. And we know how much the Rambam accomplished and needed to accomplish in learning. Ibn Tibbon, his translator, writes to him and says, I want to come to Mitzrayim, I want to come to Cairo to see you and discuss some issues on the translation. The Rambam writes back and says, I am so busy from morning to night. This is my schedule. And he lays out the schedule. He says, you can come to Cairo with pleasure. You might even be able to see me from the distance, but to get close to me, not a chance. That's how hard he was working from morning till night. Did the community of Cairo, would they not have been willing to hire him as the Rov? I mean, even at KBA, if the Rambam was in town, you might take him on as the Rov. Surely he could have got a job in Cairo. He's got to work like crazy as a doctor, the Rambam. Why is that? Chaim Shmulevitz asked the same question about Rami Bar Dikule. Couldn't he go into town and say, hey, Ilan, do you know anybody? I've just come into town. It's Erev Yom Kippur. I've got nowhere to eat. You can see how poor he is. He's clearly a big Talmid Chacham and a major tzaddik. Can you find me a place to eat? He wouldn't even have to ask. If he just went into Daven Shachris this morning in Ra'anana, somebody would say, who are you? Where are you? Have you got a place to eat today? Why wouldn't he do that? Why would he go outside the town and have a barbecue made from eat these adders using a barbecue of grape pips, of great seeds? It doesn't make sense. And Chaim Shmulevitz would answer it with today's daf. Actually, the daf Kuf Yud, it's actually Sunday's daf. There was a case we have in Tanakh, in Shoftim Perek Yud Ches, where Dan didn't get a full enough territory. They didn't get enough a place to establish themselves. It was the early stages of Eretz Yisrael, while it was still being divided up, and they sent 5 emissaries up to the north, to where Dan is now. There's a park there up in the north there where Dan settled. And there was a lot of Avodah Zorah going on there. And they came and they heard somebody talking. They thought it was a familiar voice, and they go inside and they say to him, to this person, who are you? Where do you come from? It emerges, this is Moshe's grandson. This is Yonatan ben Gershom. Moshe has a son Gershom, and Gershom has a son Yonason. And Yonason is in this house of Micha, which is a base Avodah Zorah. And he's the shamus there in the idol worship, in the idol house. They said to him, aren't you Moshe's grandson? What's going on here? And he says, I heard from my father's father, nobody less than Moshe Rabbeinu. He doesn't even call him Moshe Rabbeinu. I heard from my Zayda that one should rather serve Avodah Zorah than take a job, or than not take a job, but take money from people. I'm poor, I needed money. And the Avodah Zorah people, the temple was offering a good salary. So I didn't do it because I believe in it. It's just a job. It's just a job. He thought that what Moshe meant was, rather than take money, you should rather serve Avodah Zorah. Avodah Zara Shezara Lo. What Moshe Rabbeinu meant was, if you have to take a job, no matter who you are, take a job which is beneath you if you have to. Take a job which is not appropriate to you. Avodah Zara. Avodah, work, which is Zara, which is inappropriate for you. It didn't mean Avodah Zorah, Of course, Moshe Rabbeinu didn't mean you must go and serve Avodah Zarah, but he made a mistake. The grandchild didn't understand the Zayda. Go and carry carcasses in the marketplace and don't take money. And don't say, I'm too mighty, I'm too high and mighty. You know who I am? I'm a Gadol B'Yisrael. I can't be schlepping carcasses around. If that's the only job you can find, that's what you do. When Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky came to America, the Gadol Ador, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky came to America, that's what he did for the first week until Shabbos came around and they wanted him to be there for Shabbos. So he had 1 week of schlepping carcasses around, literally. That was his job. And there again, you'll say, could the Jews of New York not have taken care of him? We'll see, not so simple. And that's, so Reb Chaim Shmulevitz would say that you see that Rami Bar Dikli was such a tzaddik that he wouldn't take from anybody to go and have a meal at somebody's house and be receiving from them. He would rather do what he did than that. And it links to a very important piece in the beginning of the Shev Shmaitza in the Hakdom. The Shev Shmaitza, as you know, is the Baal Tzos HaChoshen, where he talks about the importance of the Rebbeinu Shem created us to generate our own revenue, a spiritual revenue, to make choices, to do mitzvahs, not to just be receivers. Anybody who isn't generating value within themselves is like a poor person who's like a mace. And he talks about the difference between, based on the Maharal Miprag, the difference between a bor and a be'er. The idea of a mayon, a spring that generates water, and a bor that holds water, a pit that holds water. And a human being was put on this world to be a generator of water. And that applies not only in Torah, to be able to generate Torah, to be able to make choices, to do mitzvahs because you've chosen to do mitzvahs, not just because they're foisted on you, and to learn Torah in a way which is innovative and new and exciting, to produce new ideas. It's also in the area of parnosa, to be productive. The Rebbeinu Shem requires us to be productive, to be a ba'er, not a bor. And one of the people who did that, who really exemplified that, is Rabbi Pinchas ben Yoyer. Rabbi Pinchas ben Yoyer, if you go to Tzfat and you find Rabbi Pinchas ben Yoyer's grave, you'll see it's a heap of stones. And there's a circle around it, and there's a heap of stones there. And I remember I was about 10 years old the first time I went there with my father, and he told me that the reason was that they could never put up a tombstone that always fell down, because Rabbi Pinchas ben Yoyer would never take a gift from anybody, and even after his death, he wouldn't even take the building of a tombstone that he hadn't paid for. And you see the amount of stones. And I've always wondered, where did that come from? Where did he get that from? The Makor for it, there's a Gemara in Chulin, where there's a beautiful Gemara where Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi invites Rabbi Pinchas ben Yoyer for a meal. Rabbi Pinchas ben Yoyer agrees. Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi is so excited, he's thrilled that Rabbi Pinchas ben Yoyer has agreed to have a meal with him, because Rabbi Pinchas ben Yoyer doesn't eat with anybody. Not because of kashrus. He just doesn't want to take it. Because Ben Yoyer explains, he says, I'm worried that sometimes there are people who don't have money and they want to have you as a guest, and then I'm imposing. Sometimes there are people who have money and they don't want to have you as a guest. That's even worse. So I just don't eat by anybody, but you have money and you want a guest. So I'm happy to eat with you. The story goes on that all sorts of weird things happen and make it impossible for Rabbi Pinchas ben Yoyer to eat with Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi is amazed. He just says, this is a man who's given his life not to eat at somebody else's food. As the Gemara says, that Ma'ila biyamav lo botza pirsa she'ena shelo, that Rabbi Pinchas ben Yoyer never had a motzi out of a piece of bread that wasn't his. And from the day he was a grown-up boy, he stopped eating even from his father's house. He wouldn't take anything for nothing. Says Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, and he was willing to eat with me, but the Rebbeinu Shem intervened and didn't let him, because it's such an important value to him. So there we see, that's the Makor, that Rabbi Pinchas ben Yoyer never took a gift. It's a Gemara on Daf Zayin in Chulin. I found a sefer called the Chibat Yerushalayim. The Chibat Yerushalayim is a sefer about Eretz Yisrael. Every place where Eretz Yisrael is mentioned in the Gemara or in Tanakh, he tells where that place is exactly in Eretz Yisrael, and he tells about it a little bit. Reb Chaim Alevi Horowitz, and this was written just over 100 years ago. And he quotes from the Emek HaMelech. Emek HaMelech is by Rabbi Naftali Hirsch Bachrach. Rabbi Naftali Hirsch Bachrach was a Talmud of Rabbi Yisrael Sorogi, was a Talmud of the Arizal, quite a controversial Talmud of the Arizal. But Rabbi Naftali Hirsch Bachrach writes in his Sefer Emek HaMelech that the Arizal Gila Kivro, the Arizal pointed out where Rabbi Pinchas ben Yoyer is buried. Otherwise, we wouldn't have known. Ve'ata yesh gal avanim al kivro. And now you'll find there's a pile of stones on his grave. And they say it's because he won't allow you to build, anybody to build a tombstone. So the Makor is a Sefer Emek HaMelech, which is a 17th century Sefer written in Tzfat, that explains, based on the teachings of the Arizal, as to why it was that you've got this pile of stones there. That's where my father obviously got the tradition from and told us about it. That was Rabbi Pinchas ben Yoyer, this idea of rather doing disgraceful work, doing whatever you need to do, as also the case of Rami Bar Dikuli, to avoid even temporarily taking food, taking anything from somebody else. Just in conclusion, the Maharam Shif talks about, so why talk about it as Avodah Zorah? Why does Moshe Rabbeinu use the word Avodah Zorah, causing his grandson to make an error and go and serve Avodah Zorah? Why use the word? And the Maharam Shif explains, based on the Gemara in Shabbos, the Maharam Shif explains that a Ben Torah has to, the work he chooses should be honorable work. He should not degrade himself. It's really important that a Ben Torah, if a person is somewhat of a Ben Torah, that his clothes are clean, that he's well groomed, that he presents himself well, that he works in a respectable job, because people need to look up to him as a representative of the Torah and not see him as somebody cheap. And if one doesn't do that, it's considered as masni'ai. Ahavu Mavet. The Gemara says these are people who cause me to be hated. When a Furum person, when a Ben Torah does something and causes people to say, yeah, look at that. That's masni'ai, and that's like Avodah Zorah. So under normal circumstances, you've got to be careful to take a job, to work in an area that people look up to. Mesh, a police officer, kind of people look up to you. That's the and the Meiri, the beautiful Meiri on the Sugya, where the Meiri says you need to be careful to find a way to hide your poverty. If you're a Ben Torah, if you're a Talmid Chacham, hide your poverty, because people don't like to see it. It doesn't look good for Torah that a Ben Torah looks terribly poor. So hide your poverty. And if you really can't, if you're so poor and you really can't, and you have to hire yourself, then under normal circumstances, do it in a way, in a good way. But if you can't hide it anymore, yashkir עצמו אף בעבודה שהיא זרה לו. Based on this Gemara, if you have to, there's no choice, but you've got to do degrading work, then rather do degrading work than take tzedakah, because there's nothing more degrading than taking tzedakah. That's the worst thing to do. That's the last resort to do. Before you take tzedakah, work in something that's degrading. But if you can manage, don't work in something that's degrading because of masni'ah. You don't want people to look at you and either to say, you're so disgustingly poor, or to say, look at the kind of work this person does. Now, if Talmid Chacham has to present himself in a way that people look at it and people admire it and people feel good with it, so that we can be from v'ahavta es Hashem elokecha to be me'ahev Hashem, to cause Hashem to be loved by the way we project ourselves, by the way we present ourselves, and by the way we conduct ourselves with the public.